From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Dan O'Brien will provide his weekly input on the grain market trends, Dan offering his take on what he sees as the comparative resiliency of grain prices amidst the overall market fallout from the coronavirus. He'll talk about how all of this is affecting old crop grain marketing opportunities. Then the final segment in this week's series on the new class of Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. They'll be honored in ceremonies this evening here in Manhattan. Featured today from Allen County, Dick and Karen Works. And later on, K-State's Mary Knapp will be back in to cover the Kansas agricultural weather scene with us. All that and more ahead on this Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, Amber Alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Good to have you along with us for our Friday edition as we take up the grain markets. And most assuredly, uncertainty and worry is prevailing in so many markets generally, and the commodity market's not spared to that. Let's take another look now with Dan O'Brien joining us via phone from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. Grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Of course, Dan, it all revolves back to the coronavirus issue. The straight-out question here for the grain producer out there, is there any thread of hopeful news? Because these markets just can't seem to gain any kind of a toehold in this.
Well, I think the admonition of an old poem comes to mind. If you can keep your head about you when everyone else is losing theirs, it's a great thing. So we're trying to keep our heads about us, I think, and maintain our perspective in terms of what real market supply-demand will be, and realizing that, yes, there are great concerns about the spread of this coronavirus and the impact it could have on economic activity, on the willingness of investors to buy, et cetera. I think the last time that I remember issue like this where people were wondering about just where we were going, well, it was in 2008 when we had financial panic, and summer happened to be an election year. We, at that time, were wondering about the financial Main Street markets, and we're worried about having money available to loan to finance inventories. So it automatically put everybody, I say everybody in broad terminology, put people into a cash situation, and so they held off buying grain for inventories. Well, that really put a kibosh on the grain markets, at least temporarily. So here we're coming into this. It's and our concerns aren't in the financial markets, although that's be a secondary impact if things persist. But on the ag side, again, we're not concerned really about planting or whatever, although, yes, we still have this USDA report that's due to come out at the end of this month regarding what final harvest acreage is in northern states. That's out there, but that's 200, 500 million bushels, kind of the thought of something happening. So that's out there. We are concerned in ag, I think. On the demand side, we look at what's happening in the fuel market and wonder, when you look at gasoline prices, diesel fuel prices, how that could affect ethanol profitability, which has been struggling. So far, we haven't seen a cascade of announcements in the ethanol industry of plant closures, although I'm sure they're under continued duress. We do see ethanol production staying pretty decent. The couple ominous things that are out there that, again, and if you're looking at ethanol, you're looking at feed grain usage and cash demand. And we do see here in the last several weeks the weekly ending stocks of ethanol creeping higher. And at the pump, we've seen diesel and gasoline prices moving to the lower side. So I guess personally for me, that'd be one of the places I would look to see if feed grain demand holds up for ethanol production.
And so far, so good. Is that your inkling here?
so far so good.
Given everything?
There's not great profitability at all, but they're still buying corn. And if anything, probably what helps them is that the price of corn's been going down, on the futures. So that's one thing to watch. Of course, we're looking at livestock feeding now. We'll have a quarterly stocks report again coming out here on the 31st. We do the back math on it, and we look at livestock feed use. So we're watchful of that. We do see out of the USDA projections of beef production to be up, pork production to be up here in 2020, broilers up higher, turkey up a little bit, total meat production to be higher. Prices are forecast to be down. We've seen some gyrations and such in recent weeks, but steers projected to be down about $2.50 per hundredweight this year as opposed to last year. Hogs down about $1. Broilers down about 4 cents a pound. Turkey down a little bit also. So, in the midst of that, the U.S. meat trade, exports of beef projected to be up, although that's been weakening some. Pork strongly higher. Broilers up a little bit. Turkeys sideways to lower. Mature chickens a little bit lower. So, we're really kind of getting off into my colleague Glenn Tonser's purview more so than myself. But what happens in that meat trade is going to drive livestock profitability and feed use. So we're watching for that. And also, when you look at the soybean side of things, we're looking at crush levels for soybeans. So far, projections are for domestic crush of soybeans in this coming marketing year. The next one, they'll start September 1, to be about the same as this year. So, and this year's amount's up a little bit from the previous year. So, again, you're coming back to livestock feeding, soybean meal usage. So we have some parts of the U.S. ag economy that are very, very dependent. Well, they're all dependent on either U.S. consumers through energy or meat consumption, or foreign consumers as they're buying meat, U.S. meat exports, and or grains to feed their own livestock. So these things are at issue. I think the perspective that I have on it is when I look at where futures are trading, D's corn, 2020, in the midst of all of this and hand-wringing, lots of worries, we're sitting somewhere around 370, 375. That is not as low as you get if we had completely lost confidence.
It could be worse, is your point.
Well, yes. We've seen times at 350 or below for D's corn. So far, with the uncertainty that we have, we're seeing actually a pretty level market, not a lot of carry in it, which would be indicative of some underlying demand and usage. So not all for the worst. You see November soybeans, 868, and again, that's not 802 or 801 or 750. It's still 868. It's not 9 either, or 10, yeah. But holding at that decent level. Wheat's been up and down of late. We have had some good wheat exports. If you look at July, 437, we've seen 460, 470, 480 in terms of futures before, but it still has a 4 in front of it. It's not a 375 or something like that. So in a way, and again, just in terms of daily trade, we're up and down. We're seeing volatility up and down, 5-6 cents, et cetera. Soybeans, given that they're a higher price level commodity, they're moving at about the same percent as corn is. It's just it's a higher base to move from. So we have volatility, and these overwashing influences from the financial markets, from the energy markets, are affecting us on the ag side. But I think key for us, at least as we look at it right now, is whether our underlying demand holds up. And, with that, we've been looking closely at basis levels, and they've been pretty good for corn, for hard red winter wheat, improving some for grain sorghum in different parts. Even soybeans not as bad as they could be. So, we're seeing these issues that are hitting the national news, affecting the stock market, and translating that back down to what we see happening in futures and cash markets on the grains. And so far, they're not gangbusters, but I guess I'm, in a way, thankful that we haven't seen a full-blown panic in terms of ag usage. We're still dealing with the issues that people have to eat, and they have to drive. So on the margin, there's a weakening, but there still seems to be underlying support in these markets, and we'd be hopeful for that. And it's good to remember that we're in March. Generally, a slow time in the markets. And a lot of our uncertainty and the issues on the supply side that drive us price-wise, they're out in front of us in May and June and early July. So probably the person that's in the most challenging situation would be farmers that have old crop corn, old crop grain sorghum, perhaps soybeans in some cases, or wheat, and are wondering what to do. And we're hoping for more price strength right now, and aren't seeing it. Do they continue to hold, or do they get discouraged and just move the grain? That'll be the challenge. And if they're not constrained by financial need, they probably are still in the mode to hold steady and see what the spring brings. And who can counsel against that at this time?
Right. Well, and as a final thought here, one of the fundamental triggers that we'll be looking ahead toward will be the prospective plantings report at the end of this month. And producers, well, they have a pretty good notion of what they're going to plant, corn, grain, sorghum, or soybeans, but there could still be some play in that on a broader level?
Well, yes. We have intentions, without question. There's still a lot of areas that, even with some dry weather of late, they were so soaked in those northern states. You still wonder about their ability to get those crops in a number of those. In the same states that they're doing these resurveys in to the north of us, there's a reason that they were doing those. Just they had ongoing snow cover for a good long time, and yes, very likely they'll eventually dry out, but will it be in time to get the crops planted in a timely manner, especially corn up front first?
We will be seeing that report on March the 31st, by the way. And Dan's put together his latest notes on the markets, which you can find, producers, at agmanager.info. The grain market's in unfamiliar waters right now, Dan, thanks to the coronavirus issue. We'll keep tabs on it with your help and talk with you again next Friday. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Visiting with us, Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, our regular guest each week here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Here for you now on Agriculture Today, our final installment of this week's series on the 6 Kansas couples who, in special ceremonies this evening, will be inducted as the 2019 class of Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers, on the strength of their accomplishments in production agriculture, family living, and community service. This program's longtime co-sponsors are K-State Research and Extension and Kansas Farmer Magazine. The last couple we'll tell you about are from southeast Kansas. Although he never lost interest in farming after growing up on the family operation just outside of Humboldt in Allen County, Dick Works just couldn't see that there was room for him back at the farm. So he headed to Kansas State University to pursue a degree in political science. But then fortunes changed, and Dick did, in fact, return to farm with his father, uncle, and brother in 1975. Now, Dick and Karen Works are the sole operators of the farm. Karen earned her degree from K-State as well, in dietetics, and they now oversee a 1,300-acre strictly crop production enterprise, much of which rests along the banks of the Neosho River. Dick and Karen are the third generation of the family to be recognized as Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. Dick's parents, George and Jane, were so honored in 1966, and his grandparents, W.P. and Faith Dodge, in 1931 and 32, respectively. The Works are ultra-committed to service in their community and their county. Dick offers these recollections of his early days on the farm.
I grew up on the farm, driving a tractor, and I used to say I was the only one that could wipe out 5 rows of corn with a 4-row cultivator. But we furrow irrigated, so we had to furrow out a big furrow between the corn rows. It was a great life growing up. We were real involved in 4-H. I had 3 brothers and a sister, and so there was a lot of cheap labor on the farm.
To point out, though, you went to Kansas State University upon high school graduation. You obtained a degree in political science. So was the farm on the radar at that time or not?
Not really. My oldest brother had gone to law school and was a law professor at the University of Nebraska. And the next brother had come back to the farm, and so I just didn't figure there was room for me here. But I think it was after my sophomore year, my dad and uncle both announced on one hot July day when the crops were burning up that they were ready to retire and wanted to know if I wanted to come back. And so I continued in political science, but I took some ag econ courses and some agronomy courses and graduated in 1975. Came back here and started farming in a 3-way partnership with my dad, uncle, and my brother. My dad retired shortly after that, and my uncle shortly after he retired. And so my brother and I purchased the equipment and rented the ground, and we struggled for a few years, but...
it was the 80s.
Yeah. We made it through the 80s. 80s were tough. My brother Joe went to town and started a sideline business. It was called B&W Hitches, and it's grown and done very well. The early 90s, his business was really taking off. So in 2001, he pulled out of the farm, and I've been farming it by myself ever since, and trying to do so successfully.
And doing so successfully. I want to bring Karen in here. Karen, were you brought up in an agricultural background whatsoever?
Kind of a quasi-agricultural background. My dad had a packing plant, and so he would go out and look for cattle. On Sundays, we'd drive around looking for cattle to buy for his packing plant.
This was in far northeast Kansas?
This was in Leavenworth. Well, his packing plant was in Lansing, Kansas. And so, but I grew up in a town 4-H club, and so I knew lots of farm boys. My dad would like for me to marry a farm boy, but I thought, I'm going to go off to college, and I wasn't looking for any farm boys. But then I found Dick at K-State.
She may have thought I was going to be a lawyer.
Anyway. And so I have a degree in dietetics from Kansas State University, which has been good to, when you live in a rural area, to have a degree so that you can work in your field.
And in fact, you did for 30 years for the Kansas Department of Education?
Yes, I was a regional dietitian it was actually called a child nutrition consultant for Southeast Kansas. I had from 15 to 19 counties, depending on what year it was. I did lots of work statewide, but we administered the child nutrition programs, the USDA child nutrition programs. So there's a lot of ag that goes with that, too, because we promoted farm products at schools, encouraged schools to use Kansas wheat. And towards the end of my career, some legislation was really promoting farm-to-school programs, and so I got to be involved in that type of thing through my job at KSDE.
Dick, primarily, as you were growing up and to this present day, not many head of livestock on this operation. This is primarily crop production, isn't it?
Yes, corn and soybeans. I've tried growing some other crops, milo, and we even tried growing sunflowers one year, and a tornado came along and blew them all down, so that's kind of a quintessential Kansas story, sunflowers and tornadoes. But corn and soybeans. We grew white corn for many years. After Joe started his business and I got elected county commissioner, we didn't quite have the management that we needed to keep it in top quality. It goes for human consumption and it has to be absolutely perfect. And so we switched to yellow corn and been sleeping a lot better at night.
One of the hallmarks of your operation, though, has been the devotion to conservation in many forms, in cropping practices, in land management practices. You might speak to that a bit.
Well, whenever we purchased land, we put terraces on them. Most of the land we had been farming was river bottom land, pretty flat, didn't require terraces. But as we purchased land, we were getting further away from the river, and so we focused on that, and I think we won an award, soil conservation award once. We were going pretty strong into minimum till. My dad and uncle were pioneers in that. They used to do what's called ridge till. They would furrow out for the furrow irrigation and then plant right on top of that ridge in the spring. When Joe and I started farming together, we couldn't really afford to put in all corn, so we switched to a corn-soybean rotation, and that's worked out very well for us over the years. Some other conservation practices, we've continued the minimum till, gotten a little more away from the ridge till, but strip tillage is probably still in our vocabulary.
Well, to speak to the leadership activities on the part of both of you. Karen, you're a bit modest about these things, but you've had a lineup of many contributions to community, to civic interests, so forth in this Humboldt area. 4-H, you've been very active in that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we grew up 4-Hers, and so we really thought it was important for our kids to be 4-Hers and the neighbor kids to be 4-Hers, so we were leaders in 4-H for many, many years. I'm on an arts council board. That's been taken a lot of time. When the hospital was being built, I was on a committee to help with the donations for that. Gosh, over the years, it just seems like, what are we doing right now? And there's just been a lot of little things, because we live in a small community, and they always need people to raise their hand to take part in those activities. Dick, it's really...
She was a 4-H leader before we even had kids. We had our kitchen was full of young people.
Breaking eggs on the floor accidentally.
Yeah.
And then when your kids came along, obviously,
yes.
You were fully invested.
Yes. And you can see the experience of the 4-H really benefited them through all parts of their lives. And they're good public speakers, and they did projects that they've used for a lifetime. So it's all good.
And Dick, you served on the Allen County Commission for almost a quarter of a century, if you think of it that way.
I always swore I'd never get involved in local politics. My dad was in the legislature, and when he died, they tried to get me to take his place, and I wasn't prepared to do that at the time. But I went to a young farmer and rancher meeting. Dennis McKinney was a county commissioner at the time and spoke about how it's at the local level that things get accomplished. That's who provides your law enforcement. That provides your health care, your roads and bridges, your landfills. That's where the rubber meets the road. And it kind of turned my thinking around. I was the chairman of the Republican Party when there was an opening on the county commission, and I went around tried to recruit people. And invariably they'd say, "Why don't you do it?" And I wasn't too excited about that, but I thought, well, I can do it for 4 years. And that 4 years turned into 8 years, and then eventually 24 years. And every time I'd come up for re-election, Karen would ask me, well, if you didn't do it, would you miss it? And up to the last time, I always said yes. So it was turned into an extended term.
He accomplished a lot during those 24 years.
It's a lot different than going to Topeka and getting into lengthy debates about things that really might not impact people on a personal level. I kind of liked being able to talk to my neighbors and see what their needs were and find out what their concerns were, and then have the ability to address them.
Dick and Karen Works of Allen County. They join Grant and Gayla Corley of Anderson County, Mark and Eva Gardner of Clark County, Doug and Sandra McGraw of Finney County, David and Janet Olson of Brown County, and Richard and Denise Swinson of Cloud County as the latest class of Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. Our hearty congratulations to all. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing on now with today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Chief U.S. Agricultural Trade Negotiator Greg Dowd says that currently there is no way to know if the coronavirus will impact China's ability to fulfill its purchase commitments under Phase 1 of the trade agreement between the U.S. and China. And he said China has not requested any consultations to delay those purchases. As USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue and others have noted, Dowd said that implementation of the Phase 1 agreement is on schedule. At the USDA and the U.S. Trade Representative's office, they're talking to their Chinese counterparts every day by phone or by email, and so far everything is going very well, in Dowd's words. He went on to say, quoting here, obviously this is not the best of circumstances, but so far everybody is doing everything they can to implement the agreement. Now, Reuters reported that China has met another one of their commitments under the Phase 1 agreement, setting maximum residue levels for 3 approved beef hormones used in U.S. cattle production. Meantime, Senate Finance Chairman Chuck Grassley said that China may deserve some flexibility regarding pledges of U.S. commodity purchases under the Phase 1 trade deal on the difficulties dealing with the coronavirus. Grassley said there are talks in the White House on potentially lifting some remaining tariffs on China to ease the coronavirus pressure. He said, quoting here, I think in order to do so, to do any good, it would have to be reciprocal. However, White House trade advisor Peter Navarro shot down any suggestion of tariffs being lifted, saying that calls for U.S. to either provide tariff exemptions or to suspend tariffs imposed on Chinese goods entering the U.S. are, in his word, absurd. Well, eligible producers have until this coming Monday to set up an appointment with the local Farm Service Agency office for enrollment in either agricultural risk coverage or price loss coverage for this past crop year and the current one as well. Here's a last reminder from the USDA's Rod Bain.
We're seeing those signups come faster as we're approaching March 16th, but we still have some to go yet.
And USDA Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation Bill Northey says eligible producers who do not elect and enroll in either of the 2019 crop year farm safety net programs, agriculture risk coverage or price loss coverage, become ineligible for payment if those programs are triggered.
ARC PLC is a pretty important program to help in those times of very soft prices, or in the case of ARC, it's also impacted by soft yields that have happened.
As of Thursday, over 1.4 million contracts, about 89% of expected enrollment, have been signed for 2019 crop year ARC and PLC. Producers have until close of business this Monday to schedule an appointment to complete ARC PLC enrollment with their local Farm Service Agency office. More details are also available online at www.fsa.usda.gov/ARC-PLC. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And the Inspector General of the EPA is now planning to look into whether EPA acted properly when it registered dicamba in 2016 and 2018, as well as review states' use of Section 24C labels, often used for dicamba in recent years. The inspectors plan to look into the EPA's past registrations of the dicamba herbicides XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Fexapan in the second half of 2021. The purpose of the investigation, they say, will be to determine whether the EPA adheres to federal requirements and scientifically sound principles for the 2016 registration and 2018 renewal for the new uses of the dicamba herbicide. That's according to the OIG annual plan. Well, the National Wheat Yield Contest was launched 4 years ago, a way for wheat growers to fuel that competitive fire, while at the same time learning about improved wheat management practices for their operations' benefit. Entries for the next contest are now being taken, and Marcia Boswell provides more details on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The National Wheat Foundation is accepting grower enrollment for the 2020 National Wheat Yield Contest. The contest is divided into 2 primary competition categories, winter wheat and spring wheat, and 2 subcategories, dryland and irrigated. The deadline for winter wheat entries is May 15th, with an early registration deadline of April 1st. The Yield Contest provides an opportunity for farmers to learn about other wheat management methods that they can use on their own personal operations to increase productivity. National winners will be recognized at the 2021 Commodity Classic. 2 Kansas wheat farmers were recognized at the 2020 Commodity Classic held in San Antonio in February for their successful 2019 wheat crops performance in the contest. Kansas Association of Wheat Growers members Rick Horton and Alec Horton, both of Leota, won respectively for percent increase in winter wheat dryland and high-yield winter wheat dryland. Rick Horton had a yield of 132 bushels per acre. His yield was a 340% increase over the most recent 5-year Olympic County average published annually by the USDA. His variety was Westbred's WB 4515 hard red winter wheat. Alec Horton achieved a yield of 146.81 bushels per acre. He used Westbred's WB 4792. In addition, 8 Kansas farmers were state winners in the contest. Kansas contestants must be a member in good standing of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers before completing and submitting their entry form. They must have a supervisor during harvest, and farmers must submit a harvest report. Fields must be 5 acres or larger to qualify. A grain sample from each contest entry will be required to determine the quality of wheat produced under high-yield management practices used in this wheat yield contest. It is imperative to bring quality top of mind to all wheat growers, and the Foundation believes quality is a necessary part to improve productivity. The submission of grain sample will be a requirement to qualify for national recognition. The National Wheat Yield Contest was started in 2016 to help farmers increase productivity and to help make sure there would be enough quality wheat for export. There are 24 national award opportunities for wheat growers. Farmers must be 14 years of age or older and must enter as an individual. Multiple members of a family are allowed to enter but must enter separately. To find out more information about the Wheat Yield Contest, a list of acceptable supervisors, rules, and more qualifications, visit yieldcontest.wheatfoundation.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. Well, it appears we've a wet week ahead of us in Kansas. Mary Knapp tells us more next on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care positions, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today, and as usual, to close out our Friday edition, a review of Kansas agricultural weather now from the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Joining us is Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. Mary, let's go back to this past week, the latter part of it, and into the weekend where we gravitated eventually to very warm and windy conditions.
Right. We started out the period, and that goes from March 4th. People may not remember back that far because it's been rather hectic since then. But what we started out with was a fairly cool period, actually, where we had lows in the teens and the low 20s across the state. The coldest reading was in northwest Kansas on the 7th when they got down to 11 degrees. But it didn't take long for those temperatures to ramp up. On the 9th, the Northwest was up to 80 degrees, and West Central hit 81, and that was where our warmest spot was again. So we went very quickly from winter to summer, if you will. Not quite summer, but certainly very, very warm. Accompanied with that, there were some very strong winds and low humidities, which ramped up the wildfire danger. We had red flag warnings pretty much across the state for that period. We've since backed off a little bit on the temperatures. We ended up the week, though, almost 7 degrees warmer than normal, and that is the week ending on the 10th. Again, the last couple of days, temperatures have started to moderate, but we still had our low temperatures up above freezing, which meant that we're getting a lot of growth on the winter crops, particularly winter wheat. and we're beginning to see some of the trees leaf out, bud out. So we're getting those signals for spring.
Edging in that direction. Now, we had some moisture around this past week. It'll pale in comparison, apparently, to what we'll see in the coming week. More on that ahead. But what were the reports of those rainfall amounts?
Well, the rainfall was pretty much concentrated. Well, everybody saw some moisture. In the west, it was generally less than 1/4 of an inch. And in west central and southwest, the divisional averages were 3/100 of an inch. So not particularly prolific. Increased a little bit as we got into the central divisions. There we were between 1/4 and just under 1/2 an inch, looking at about 80% of the normal for that area. They had been heavily wet at the end of February, so that was not necessarily a problem for them. Where they really saw the moisture, northeast and east central. Northeast averaged 62/100 of an inch, which is just a shade under 1.5 times what they would normally expect for the period. East Central averaged a little bit more at 63/100 of an inch, but they also are expected to see more. So it was just about 120% of their normals. Again, not huge amounts, but certainly keeping the soils wet in that area. Southeast got a little break. They averaged 53/100 of an inch, which is about 82% of normal. And they, again, have still a lot of excess moisture in the play, so they're not at all upset by having a slightly drier week.
But to point out, again, according to the latest drought monitor, we do have droughty areas in primarily western Kansas, of course.
Right. We still have seen that severe to moderate drought in southwest Kansas, Stanton, Morton. Those areas are where it's concentrated, with gradual improvement as you go north and east on that southwest corner. In the northwest corner, we're watching that fairly closely. That's still abnormally dry, but they're tilting on the borderline of going into moderate drought. A lot of that will depend upon how well they benefit from the systems that are expected over the weekend and into next week.
And let's dive right into that. We're talking about some fairly hefty rainfall in this wet week ahead, it sounds.
Right. The moisture is actually beginning to show up, and interestingly enough, southwest Kansas is seeing that. The latest radar showed some fairly nice return signals in that southwest corner, Elkhart, not quite reaching Dodge City and Garden City yet, but again, some moisture down in that area. The forecast for the Northwest is actually for a winter weather advisory through the weekend. They're expecting a rain mixed with snow. As we move further east, the amounts of moisture are likely to increase. It's going to be a mix of rain and snow, but mostly we're going to be flirting with the 31-degree freeze mark, so not super cold with this. Again, the roots of this particular system are in Southern California. We've got more of a Pacific flow than is typical for our winter season moisture. So that means more moisture available for the system, the disturbance to work with, and less in the way of the Arctic temperatures, so not the super cold that we can get when we get a front coming in.
But when you paint it all out like that, for those cattle producers who are calving right now, this is not exactly what they are bargaining for.
Right, and actually this could be more stressful for the livestock than an Arctic system, because with, again, this rain-snow mix, that means it's going to penetrate the winter hair, make them more vulnerable to the winds, and we are expecting to have some winds with this system. So that is certainly not favorable for the calving operations. And the secondary side of that is the grounds are thawed. They're likely to stay thawed, so that means a lot of mud and muck that the cattle are going to have to deal with. And again, not as positive as, say, last week, where we had some very mild open weather for calving.
And you say that the extended outlook is suggesting that sunny and warmer days may be few and far between for the balance of the month?
Not necessarily for the balance of the month. We are looking at an increased chance of wetter than normal conditions for the rest of the month. Not to say that it's all going to be rain and gloom, but it is going to be on a wet note. This next week, we are looking at a series of disturbances coming through, so we're going to have unsettled weather throughout the week, and the question will be just how unsettled it might be. That will be something people will want to monitor as they get closer to that next round of storms.
Be alert, for we are, in fact, into that time of the year once again. Mary, thanks as always for the briefing, and we'll have you back next Friday.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, along with us, and our thanks to you for joining us as well. Enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.